HSE service plan, which is due to be published in the near future. However, as indicated, the Government has committed to restore the 2012 levels of service in relation to home helps and the core community services, home care packages and personal assistance hours. Persons with medical cards are entitled to a full range of services without charge, including general practitioner services, all inpatient public hospital services, in public wards, including consultant services, all outpatient public hospital services, including dental, ophthalmology, oral services, appliances, and maternity and infant care services. How much time have I left, Chair?
11.5 minutes.
11.5 minutes. I'll have to slow down. They are also provided with prescription drugs and medicines. Subject to capped co-payment, eligibility for medical cards is generally determined by reference to the means of the individual or family, and a medical card is awarded where income is below a certain level. The Government is committed to major reforms in this matter, in the manner of which health services are delivered. The programme for Government commits to reforming the current public health system by introducing universal health insurance with equal access to care for all. As part of this, the Government is committed to introducing on a phased basis GP care without fees within its first term of office. In honouring this commitment, legislation to allow the Minister for Health to make regulations to extend this access to persons with prescribed illnesses is currently being drafted by the Department of Health, the Office of the Health and the Attorney-General, and will be published shortly. Implementation dates and application details will be announced in due course. Carers were identified as a priority theme under the economic and social disadvantage category in the dormant accounts allocation of 2007. The focus of the carers measures is to provide training to assist carers in undertaking their caring role. The Department of Social Protection has been the lead department for this measure, and also in relation to payments and respite grant, and the funding is being channelled through the department's vote. Pobal is administering the measure on behalf of the department and is responsible for the ongoing monitoring and evaluation of the programme. Applications were accessed by Pobal, and 12 groups were approved for funding in December 2008, totalling 1.48 million. The grants range in size from the Carers Association, receiving more than €500,000, and Caring for Carers almost €250,000, to small groups such as the Ross's Community Development Project in Donegal getting 38,000, the Ballinrobe Family Resource Centre in Mayo getting 10,000. I'm very conscious of the needs of carers. I also fully understand that a wide range of other groups such as unemployed people, parents, pensioners and people with disabilities depend on welfare budget for vital supports. And I want to assure the House that the Government, in the context of a very tough budgetary environment, will continue to do its utmost to protect the most vulnerable people in society. The requirements of the Department of Social Protection highlights how important stable finances are. Over the next 5 years, the Department of Social Protection will spend over €100 billion. All of this has to be raised by taxation or in the short term by borrowing. Obviously, any borrowing involved would have to be repaid by the taxpayer at some time in the future. It is clear that if this Government did not ensure that we had a sustainable financial situation, that as the largest single vote, the Department of Social Protection and its clients would be the first to suffer. This Government will, of course, make sure we provide this money and this support. It is up to other parties to explain how their policies would maintain the same level of commitment to social welfare clients. Our public finances are performing well. Based on the latest information, including the November tax receipts, the Department of Finance now projects that the general government deficit for this year will be 8.2%, well inside the required target of 8.6% under the extensive deficit procedure. In addition, the projected deficit for 2013 to 2015 is 7.5% and 5.1% and 2.9% respectively, all in line with the targets to be achieved. Stable public finances are an essential prerequisite to long-term economic growth and job creation. We will only be able to successfully access the markets in the long term if the markets believe that we have a credible fiscal strategy and indeed that we can repay our debts. Confidence is returning to Ireland. Unemployment fell by 3,600 on an annual basis in Q3 of the first year of the first year-on-year fall recorded since 2005. Solid economic indicators such as the Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index shows that Ireland is the only country in the EU area to record an expansion. The 9th successive month of expansion, retail sales have strengthened over recent months. There are many positive signs, including renewed private sector job creation, sustained and significant foreign investment, strong exports, and, as I've indicated, restored access to international funding markets. The journey ahead is difficult, but we must travel with a sense of purpose. For many, particularly as we get older, our first choice is to remain living at home in the communities which we are a part of, rooted to and familiar with. Government policy is to support people to live in dignity and independence in their own homes and communities for as long as possible. Where appropriate, the health service also supports access to quality long-term residential care. I understand that people requiring care face particular challenges in their daily lives, and the family carers have to make sacrifices in order to look after their loved ones. I've set out in the foregoing the very definite steps the Government has taken to make sure that those vulnerable groups are protected to the greatest extent possible. This Government is well aware of and values the contribution of the many carers who do an extraordinary job in our community every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. I now call on Deputy Billy Keller.
Thanks,
for sharing time with
Deputy Troy. Thank you very much. I think I have 10 minutes, so Councillor, if I can interrupt you just a little bit before that. First and foremost, may I just say I welcome the opportunity to speak on this particular issue, and having made a contribution to the Social Welfare Bill, I suppose I will be repeating myself to a certain extent on occasions, but I think it's worth repeating. May I also say that the technical group have put down a very comprehensive motion in private members' time. And it's a motion, it's a motion worth reflecting on in terms of, first and foremost, it outlines and recognises the contribution that carers make to our society. It also goes on then to further acknowledge that they need support from government and from the state, and then it calls on the government to act on that in a meaningful way. And I suppose at the outset, when you do look at the advances that have been made in trying to encourage people through their own mechanisms and through state aid support, either through the carers allowance or benefits and home care packages, home helps, special needs assistance and the home care packages, and then the development of grants towards people to ensure that their homes, in the event of they being disabled, are structurally changed to make sure that they can live at home in dignity with independence. And you see, Minister, the difficulty I have here, and I think most people have, is that when you look at the issue of the respite care grant, it clearly was an amazing decision in my personal view, and I think in many people's view, that it was the one area where it seems to be now that we're targeting in on people that are vulnerable in our communities in terms of intellectual and physical disability. And I don't say that lightly, but the fact of the matter is, in terms of cuts in the area of health and social welfare, we've had home helps cut, carers now through the respite care grant. We had the unsightly and unseemly situation where you had people campaigning outside government buildings in September to retain special needs assistance. And we now have the situation of home care packages being cut as well by the Department of Health. And that clearly seems to me to be an indication that this government, in trying to live and honour its commitments in some areas with regard to no increase in taxation and no cuts to basic social welfare, that in between vulnerable groups of people and cohorts of people are being attacked in a very malicious way. And as I said, I don't use those words lightly, but it seems to me that this is the case. Now, I want to say clearly here, I actually believe that the respite care grant is a very valuable contribution to people who are caring for a person at home. It makes an enormous contribution, and particularly an enormous contribution to many people who don't qualify for the carers or the half carers rate, but in terms of giving them some support and recognition recognition for what they do on behalf of the state in terms of caring for people who have physical, intellectual disabilities or are growing old and want to remain at home for as long as possible. So this particular cut was mean and it was nasty. And the Minister referred to in her speech there about, that this budget is a very difficult budget. Well, we all knew it was going to be a difficult budget. Every political party in the Dáil agreed about the broad parameters. My political party party signed up to the memorandum of understanding. We put forward our case before the last general election. We outlined the severity of the budgetary situation. Nobody needs to be informed of that. It was quite obvious the difficulties that we've had. But it was the choices that have been made since then. And the one choice that I am amazed was not made was that she refused to increase the universal social charge by a minimum of 3%, which would have given you an awful lot of headroom in terms of addressing the difficulties that the vulnerable in our society are facing now because of the social welfare cuts. And equally, Minister, you also referred to the whole issue of 8.6% versus 8.2%. Even without going ahead and taking or increasing the universal social charge to those earning over 100,000, there was headroom already built in because we actually had beyond our targets in terms of meeting the critical 8.6% that's set out in the Memorandum of Understanding to the lender's last resort. So there was plenty room. There was plenty of room, in my view, to protect the people who are in receipt of the Respite Carers Grant. So for all the broad economic arguments that are being made about the fact that lenders of last resort are dictating, we would have to access the funds from elsewhere, where will we get it? The point is, this was within our own resource. It was available to us. But the decisions that were made were not made in accordance with the very fundamental principle of fairness. And fairness is what this is about. I mean, if somebody can tell me in this House that it is fairer not to increase taxes on a person earning over 100,000, it's not fair to do that. But yet it is fair to take €325 of people in receipt of the Respite Care Grant. And I don't think that most people in your party, or actually most people in this House, privately believe that that is fair. It is deeply unfair, to say the very least. We have had situations, and Minister Rabbitte referred to pirouetting and the rest of it out in the plinth, and people saying that they had very strong concerns about this whole issue of the attack on the Respite Care Grant and other areas of social welfare. For example, the child benefit. Let's be quite clear. This was a red line issue before the election. It was a red line issue. Now it is no longer a red line issue, and it is quite possible that we might have a situation where we see further rollbacks on commitments made prior to the election. But even in the context of the programme for government, Minister, this clearly is a social welfare payment. It clearly is a payment that's very important to families who have children and are to the pin of their collar on a regular basis. Now, when we talk about the Respite Carers Grant and the other mechanisms that the state have got involved in over the areas of home help, special needs assistance, home care packages, the purpose of all of this is to implement a policy that all political parties and those that are involved in the healthcare industry subscribe to, and that is moving people from the acute hospital setting to the independent setting and supports at home, or at least into a community care setting. But this is the very opposite. This is going to achieve the very opposite. It is going to force families to make a decision about whether they can continue to care for their loved one in the home setting, or whether or not that person will have to be put into long-term care or institutionalisation. And that is against everything that in all stated policies, vision for change, and the whole area of medical care and how you move people from the expensive acute hospital setting to the area of demand that's in the home place. And the Carers Association reckon, with some analysis, that it costs, or it saves the state, $4 billion a year. Carers save the state $4 billion a year. And being quite truthful, I am still at a loss as to how this particular mechanism or this particular proposal found its way into a budget that was meant to be based on fairness, equality, and ensuring that those that are most vulnerable will be protected, and those that had and needed the support of the state, that they were going to be defended in all. And clearly, the social welfare bill in
2 minutes.
2 minutes, and clearly the social welfare bill has undermined that and stripped it away. Now, I said to Minister Joan Burton last week in the Dáil here on the social welfare bill, that she's making great play about the fact that she's trying to protect the most vulnerable, and that this social welfare bill had achieved that. And any critical analysis of payments made to people in terms of respite, and people with child benefit, and then when you look across the spectrum to those that are earning most, it clearly is the case that those that have the bent back at this stage from working hard, diligently, supporting a loved one at home who needs care and attention and treatment, that they effectively are the ones that are being abandoned by this government. And the ones on 100,000 plus have had no cut to their basic pay over and above anybody else in this country with regards to PRSI contributions and cutting child benefit. And if anybody can tell me that this was a budget that actually taxed the rich to give to the poor, simply is not the case, or simply is not very good at the basic mathematics and arithmetic of budget making. And I just want to say, finally, with regard to the pronouncements of Alia Iacta Est, let's be quite clear, the die is cast, but the die is cast for carers. The die is cast by this government that is saying quite clearly to carers, you cross the Rubicon on your own, you paddle your own canoe, because the state is more interested, and this government is more interested, in supporting the rich, in supporting people who can make it on their own. Give them the break. And yet we have a situation where we have this mean, spiteful cut to the respite care grant. And it is nothing other than a mean, spiteful cut. And I know, Minister, you believe it, and all the deputies in this House believe it. But for some reason of simple arithmetic, they decided, when they looked at the figures, do you know what, we will just take the €325 off the respite care grant and everything else will be fine. And there was an easier way to do it and a fairer way to do it. And unfortunately, on this occasion, what happened was Fine Gael got their way at Cabinet, Labour surrendered, and we now have a situation where the most vulnerable are paying. And that clearly, in my view, is not good enough, and it's unacceptable, and it's something, even at this late stage, this reprehensible cut should be reversed to ensure that those that need it most get it most.
Deputy Troy, 5 minutes, Deputy.
Thank you, Cahirlock, and thank to my colleague, Deputy Kelleher, for sharing time. And can I thank the technical group for bringing forward this extremely important motion in the private members' time. I think, as previous speakers have said, a lot of what I'm going to say I've said last week in the few minutes I got to speak on the social welfare bill. A few minutes we all got to speak on it because, as we all know, the government rammed it through and guillotined it and didn't afford the opportunity to go into the bill in great detail as we so wish. Minister, I was listening to you on the monitor before I came down, and I began to wonder, you said carers are still in receipt of their full carers, they're still in receipt of the home care packages, they're still in receipt of this. Yes, and the way you were talking on it, you swear it was the job from heaven, the job that anyone would want to do. They're only getting what they're entitled to do. Do you realise the money they're saving? But certainly the manner in which I felt you were portraying it out through the monitor was, that they should be thankful for all they're getting. They're only getting what they're entitled to do. The Carers Association in this country are saving in the region of €4 billion per annum. €4 billion per annum. 5 times the figure that they're actually costing the social welfare. And just to say that the carers recipients are the only people on social welfare who are actually working for their payment. They're working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And in excess of 90% of people in receipt of carers allowance are family carers. And they're doing it not for the money, not for the benefits that you outlined earlier on. They're doing it purely and simply for the love of the family member that they're caring for. And as my colleague said earlier on, they feel extremely let down. They feel that their contribution to society is not being acknowledged by this government. And I suppose, certainly in my short time, it's the first time I saw coming in private members' business, one member from the government taking the whole 30 minutes in relation to speaking on behalf of the government. I would have thought that your backbench TDs and fellow government TDs would only be too delighted to come in and stick up for the carers, because they're saying one thing in the constituency and they're doing a different thing when they come up here into Leinster House. Minister, the carers carried out a survey themselves between the 31st of October and the 3rd of November. 26.7% of carers who took part rated their stress levels at 5 on a scale of 1 to 5. 26.7% their stress levels at 5. They're stressed out of it. 45.8% rated themselves at 4. And 22.5% rated at 3. 75% of them said they're more stressed now than they were 12 months ago. What you have done here is you have closed the valve to let off steam. The respite care grant was a mechanism by which people could avail of a service, maybe a couple of nights a month, maybe once a week or once every couple of weeks, however it best suited them. It was an opportunity for them to release the pressure, to have some time for themselves. Because the biggest worry so many of the carers worry about is what is going to happen, my loved one, if the carer themselves fall sick. I think this is a cruel cut. I think Minister Rabbitte is wrong when he says it's a modest cut. It's not at all modest. It's a 20% cut in a grant that the carers who provide invaluable service, not alone to their own families, but invaluable service to the state. An invaluable service to the state, a 20% cut. As I said already, the money that it costs, that they're saving the state, in excess of €4 billion per annum. Minister, this also comes on the back of savage cuts to home help hours in the various regions. Savage cuts to home help hours. And can I just finish off by saying there has been alternatives. There has been alternatives proposed by people on this side of the House. You didn't want to take those alternatives. You didn't want to accept them. They were costed by the department, they were costed through parliamentary questions. You did not want to accept them. You took your own political choices. Your political choice was to cut the respite care grant. And I listened to Minister Burton in her deliberations in the Senate earlier on, when she said she's going to publish some report in relation to the future of child benefit at the end of January. She was saying that to appease some of the Labour senators who are getting wobbly at this stage. But the question I'd ask is, why doesn't she publish these reports before the decisions are taken? Why don't we change the way that things are done in this House? Why don't we all look at how we can achieve better savings in the various departments, not after the horse is bolted, but before the decision or the die is cast? Certainly, I made suggestions here last week to Minister Burton, having spoken with a number of officials and retired officials from the Department of Social Welfare, in terms of how we can accelerate the amount of fraud. Because I don't think anyone can stand over when someone is knowingly, fraudulently making claims. But the Minister didn't seem to comprehend that that is another alternative.
Thank you.
But again, I don't know how anyone in their right mind, or anyone who's interested in fairness and interested in quality, can come in and vote this motion down tomorrow evening. And I compliment the technical group for bringing it forward and giving us an opportunity to speak on it in the House again.
Thank you. Deputy O'Crella.
On my own behalf and on behalf of Sinn Féin, I want to fully support the motion in the name of the deputies in the technical group. The motion recognises the absolutely critical contribution of carers in our society, and it calls for the reversal of one of the cruelest cuts in Budget 2013, the cut to the carers' respite grant. I would ask all ministers and all government deputies who are in the last Dáil to go back over the Dáil record and find the many occasions on which most of them spoke in opposition private members' time in support of carers. And there are a number of examples. And then to try and square their fine words in opposition with their deeds now in government. It can't be done. There were choices for the Fine Gael Labour government to make, and they pretend that their hands were tied, and in the case of the Labour Party in particular, Minister, they claim that this left them with no choice but to impose cuts, such as the respite care grant, in breach of their pre-election commitments. Now, I believe that's a false claim. In our alternative budget and our jobs plan, Sinn Féin presented proposals designed to protect the vulnerable, to tax fairly those best able to afford tax increases, and to stimulate the economy to encourage growth and employment. We were not the only ones to do so, but all have been dismissed by this coalition, which takes its cue not from the Irish people, but from the Troika. We identified over €1 billion that could be raised from wealth taxes, and €365 million from a new higher rate for those on incomes over €100,000 per annum. If even a fraction of those measures had been introduced, then the coalition would have recouped many times the so-called savings made by cutting the respite care grant. The Carers Association has pointed out that the average cut in income support for carers is 5% in budget 2013. And that is more than twice the average cut in income support to all other recipients of social protection payments at 1.8%. The Carers Association is correct also when it says that the respite care grant is a core payment for family carers, and is used to buy in-home and residential respite, as well as meet the everyday additional costs of caring in the home. This is, of course, contrary to government claims that it has protected core social protection payments. The coalition has claimed that, and I quote, carers will remain one of the few areas where the department continues to make double payments in recognition of the valuable work that carers do, unquote. But again, the Carers Association points out that family carers who receive this so-called double payment at a total cost of €100 million provide care which would, were it to be provided by the HSE, cost the Exchequer €1.5 billion. Carers work for their payment, often 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It is estimated that overall family carers receive approximately €800 million from the social protection budget, and they save the health budget over €4 billion. I again appeal to the government to reverse this cruelest of cuts in their budget 2013. If they fail to do so, we will know for certain that the words in praise of carers are nothing more than patronising waffle, plumos, by any other word from a government that preaches compassion but practices punishment of the most vulnerable. Count Corlia, on this issue at least, I conclude by urging government to do the right thing. At least in this one instance, do the right thing, or else stop pretending to care for carers. Go on,
Very good. Perhaps, is there somebody else following on? There's 1 minute left. Somebody wants to. Whose slot is this? Is it Sinn Féin slot? Yeah.
Happy to fill the minute if that's what you want me to do, Count Corlia.
You have a minute.
I wonder. I will certainly reiterate my appeal to the Minister. I think that this is one of those glaring obscenities in Budget 2013, in which there are many, but this one is glaring. And I have it to say that I'm very conscious of the extent of the discomfort that this has caused for backbench TDs in both Fine Gael and Labour, not unique to Labour at all in this instance. And I would urge you to use your special position in government, Minister Lynch, to insist that this particular obscenity is removed from the text of Budget 2013. It is the very least that should be done in recognition of the special role that carers play in our society and the absolutely essential purpose that they serve in the service of those who are unable to help themselves.
You move the adjournment, please?
I so move.
Thank you, Deputy. We now move back to the Finance Local Property Tax Bill 2012 committee stage. Who is in possession? Deputy Healy-Rae.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And could I just continue, Minister, by stating my opposition to the proposals with regard to revenue and the fact that revenue will now have far-reaching powers when it comes to forcing people to pay the property tax. And also, we're fearing, and a lot of people are fearing, the fines bill, which will be coming before the House, and what the implications of that are going to be. Another very important point, Minister, is you know this yourself, in our towns and in our villages around the country, when houses were selling for 200,000 and 300,000 euros, in recent times, many of those houses have sold through NAMA for figures such as 40 and 50 and 60,000. And to be honest, Minister, in some cases, it was like a lucky bag, buy 20 and get 10 free. And that has been happening. And when people are having their houses valued, Minister, where are we going to be when it comes to putting a value on those properties? Is it not true to say that if you're living in an estate, and in recent times, if a property in that estate sold for 40 or 50 or 60,000, is it not fair, right and reasonable? Even though a person may have a mortgage of 200,000 or 300,000 on their property, if they can point to a house down the street that sold for 40 or 50,000, that is the true asset value. That is what the house made on the property market. So therefore, if they are going to have to pay a tax, the tax should be at that value. And that's a very important point. Minister, I'm sure that you're aware that local authorities at present are preparing their budgets and passing their budgets and having their budget meetings. For instance, I can account for Dail, a place you know very well, that last night had their budget meeting where they had to make an allowance of 9,000 euros for half a year's property tax on properties that they own which are under their umbrella. Now, Minister, you know that if Dail County Council, Town Council, are going to have to pay 9,000 euros for half a year next year, that money is going to come from some other part of their budget where they were providing necessary services with that money. So again, people are going to be hit on the double. We're being told it's to provide better local services, but in that instance, you're taking away local services. Kerry County Council yesterday were at their budget. They've made an allowance of 40,000 euros to pay the property tax. We were led to believe that the local authorities would not have to pay the property tax. That 40,000 euros is not going to fall out of the sky. It is going to have to be taken from somewhere else. So people who were relying on that money, whether it was for street cleaning, whether it was for fire stations, whether it was for repair of footpaths, whether it was for street lighting, that 40,000 doesn't appear from nowhere. It comes from the budget to pay the property tax. So again, the whole thing is wrong. And the final word that I'd say, Minister, and again, I want to emphasise that I have nothing personally but the utmost of respect for you and for your political experience. But I will remind you, Minister, that the government parties, when they were entering into power, when they were campaigning, the one thing that they said was that previous governments had lost their way. Well, marry up that with this scenario. On the day that this budget was being passed, that the Minister with responsibility for introducing it didn't see fit to be here in the House, and that he was away in India. And I will say no more about that. But I will say that those parties said that other governments had lost the run of themselves, and when they were introducing a property tax in Ireland, when they were going hurting the most vulnerable people that we have, young couples who are burdened with this massive debt, which they will never free themselves from, Minister, unless there is a massive write-down. And what should actually happen to those young couples, Minister, is that if they have a mortgage of 250,000, but if today that house is valued at 100,000, there should be a bailout for those young couples, the same as there was a bailout for the banks, and their mortgages should be readjusted to the value of the house. And if the value of the house is 100,000, their mortgage should be reduced to 100,000. They should pay a property tax on 100,000, and that should be the individual. And at least they could see some light for the rest of their lives, then besides an overpowering debt, a burden that's down upon them. And I really want to emphasise that too. And I know that it's not falling on deaf ears with you, Minister, because of your experience. You wouldn't be in politics for as long as you are, only that you have listened to people back over the years. But I know that you can't think that this is right. It's ill-devised, it's ill thought out, it's been rammed through by a minister who really has lost touch with reality. And again, that is all I will say about that. But to be in India, when a budget was being presented with a property tax for the first time in many, many years, it didn't make sense, and it didn't send out the right message to the young people of Ireland who are suffering at present and who are living on the most minute budgets. They're failing to pay their electricity. They're trying to scrape every week to do the shopping and to try to make their small budgets go as far as possible. And here they are now, they're going to see the mighty people on this side of the house impose a property tax on them. It's wrong, it's immoral, it's totally insane. And the people, believe me, Minister, are very angry over it, in particular the younger couples who are saddled in debt. And thank you very much.
Thank you. There's nobody else offering. I call on the Minister to respond.
Thanks very much, Can Corla. First of all, I'd like to thank all the deputies who contributed to the first round of the committee stage debate. And once it settled down, there were some very interesting interventions and very interesting comments. I don't think I'll be able to reply to everything, because if I do, I'll take up the rest of the time that's available. But I'd like to deal with a couple of points that were reflected across the House in the debate. First of all, the initial criticism is that we're guillotining the bill and it's being put through without adequate debate. Well, very often budgetary measures are put through on that basis. From time immemorial, the resolutions are taken on budget night for the tax changes, and they have to be put through. They have to be put through before midnight. In recent years, the social welfare bill is taken on a very short time frame to implement another set of budgetary measures, and we're implementing on this occasion the property tax measures as well on this occasion. Now, I mean, if you don't want to hear me, I'll sit down, and you can ramble on like you were for the last hour and a half. If you want me to reply, I'll reply. So which is it?
Would you please? Hold a second.
Which is it?
Would you please allow the Minister to respond? Thank you.
Now, the revenue commissioners who have been charged with collecting this tax have informed me that if we legislate in the finance bill, it will be too late for them to make the arrangements they require to collect the tax. So the revenue have advised me that we should legislate before Christmas so that they have certainty about the provisions of the bill so that they can make the arrangements of the tax. So that's the first point I'd like to make. The second point I'd like to make is in reply to Deputy Donnelly. He asked about amendments. The way I'm going to deal with the amendment issue is, I obviously can't do it tonight, but I'm noting any interesting points that are made, and we will come back and amend in the course of the finance bill. Already, for example, I'm considering amendments on the position of executors and whether they would be liable or not. I'm considering the pirates situation, and I have already made a commitment that houses that are affected by pirates won't have to pay the local property tax. But what's in question there is the actual format of the amendment. I'm also, because I got a number of representations, looking at the position of approved housing bodies. And if people come up with good suggestions tonight, I look at them again, and we can adjust it in the finance bill, and it kicks back in. The main drive tonight was on the title of the bill, and there was very strong objections to the fact that it's called the local property tax. Now, there's only 3 words in that. Now, I presume we all agree that it's a tax. So there are only 2 words in question now, whether it's a property or it's local, all right? On the issue of property, first of all, it's a tax on houses. And because it's a tax on houses, it's a property tax. The same way as in the budget, when I brought in excise increases. I brought them in on tobacco, and I brought them in on alcohol, but I didn't bring them in on hydrocarbons. But it was still described as an excise tax. You don't have to do everything that's subject to a particular tax before it carries the title. And because all property isn't included, which was the argument from the early speakers tonight, it shouldn't be called a property tax, is a ridiculous proposition. Because it's property that's being taxed, and it's quite valid to call it a property tax. And taxes that are very closely analogous to this tax all over the European Union and around the world are all described as property tax. The third word is local. Now, is it local or isn't it? Well, the proceeds, it's a tax, Deputy McGrath, that's going to be used by local authorities. In the first year, 65% of it will be transferred to the local authorities, because obviously there are administrative things that have been put in place, and that will increase. And in over a space of a couple of years, the total amount collected in this tax will be used by local authorities to fund the services that they provide. And then when the estimate is being prepared by the new councils at the end of 2014 for the 2015 financial year, the local authorities, newly elected, will have a discretion of plus or minus 15% on the rate of the tax. And then it's up to subsequent administrations to decide whether they'll transfer further discretion to the local authorities or whether they'll keep it at the plus or minus 15%. But it's an evolving situation. This is a major structural change in the tax system of the country. And you know as well as I do that it has been advocated for years. What is the biggest problem in this country at the minute? Unemployment. What do you get if you tax work? You get less jobs. So I am not putting I'm not putting taxes on work. Sorry, the money is coming from everybody who's the owner of a property. But the problem previously is people like yourself, Deputy, refuse to pay. Now this time you'll pay, because it'll be taken off of you if you don't. That's the difference. And we're going to have a situation where everybody will pay on this occasion, and there won't be guys like you. You're always giving out to the bondholders. You're another bondholder in a small way. You won't pay your way. You won't pay 100 quid. And you'll avail of local services, and you won't pay €100. What kind of example is that to the public of Ireland? Those are absolutely ridiculous positions.
Do you think everybody has a resident leprechaun with a cock of gold?
Sorry, Deputy, would you please?
I don't have the time to go into it tonight, but everybody knows that property is a fixed asset. If you tax property, it's more dependable. It's not a transaction tax. It's good for the tax base. And people who have assets should be taxed. And this is a tax on assets, and they're being taxed on that. It's a fair tax. And all those people who don't contribute, on this occasion, they'll contribute a small amount. You see, everybody talks about fairness. Now, I'll tell you what my concept of fairness is. There's a concept of fairness being propagated by certain sections of the House here, and there are some small, discrete group of extraordinarily wealthy people, and if you only took a lot of tax off of those, no one else would have to pay anything. That's the thesis. Now, fair enough, the wealthy should pay. That's why we're insisting on pegging in a minimum 30% tax. Regardless of what taxpayer people have, they'll pay 30%. Now, that's fair. But the other side of fairness for the people who live on my road, in my housing estate, is that everybody makes a contribution. And those people who get up in the morning and they're both working and they're taking their kids to the creche or they're dropping them off in school and they pass down houses where people don't get up in the morning, they think everybody should share and everybody should pay. Now, all of you, we're all in the same profession, and you know what is regarded as extremely unfair in housing estates is where the local authority comes in and buys a house and puts in a person who's in need of social housing, and they're a tenant there and they pay rent, and then everybody along the road is paying mortgages. Now, when it comes to property tax, I believe that everybody on the road should pay a small amount in accordance with their capacity to pay. And there's nothing wrong. That's fair. That's fairness. That's fairness. But
Listen, do you want a row going on, or do you want to?
You're propagating an argument. You're propagating an argument that everybody shouldn't pay. Go into the big corporation estates in any of the cities. Are you telling me that the people who have been on tenant purchase, and it's up to 85–90% on tenant purchase, are the only people who should pay because they're the owners, and the people who are paying rent and who aren't tenant purchasers shouldn't pay anything? Everybody should pay. Everybody should, in the end of the day, make a small contribution. That's fairness. That's fairness.
Just settle down. You can speak.
That's fairness.
We have the floor.
Now, we have had Deputies Higgins and Deputies Barrett in different ways trying to rally people to some revolutionary cause. And I heard by Barrett last week, and he got very impassioned. He was calling people to the barricades, and he was throwing the little streets upon the grate, you know. And the only problem with that call for revolution is, I don't think you'll get a big crowd of revolutionaries rallying behind the banner of, we oppose property taxes, don't pay property taxes. That was never a great slogan for the left. Now, your ideological position seems to me to owe far more to Groucho Marx than Karl Marx. Because you're taking up ridiculous ideological positions. If Lenin heard you, he'd have got back on the train at the Finland station, and he'd never have gone to the Winter Palace if he heard what his successors in revolution are now advocating. You put yourself in an absolute ridiculous position. No, I'm all for reasoned debate. And you know what's wrong with a lot of people here tonight is they're disappointed that the government's programme is working. They're building political careers on failure. They're building political careers on the misery of the people, and they're hoping that the difficulties will continue. And they got a shock today. Because as well as the internationally traded economy going well, the domestic economy has lifted, and in the third quarter of this year, there's growth in the domestic economy. And GDP is growing again. And it's going to grow stronger this year than estimated in the budget. And next year's figures, on the basis of today's figures, are going to be stronger than what's built into the budget. And this is working. Despite all your theory and all of your arguments that this will never work, it is working. And we're getting the country out of the misery it was in when we took it over. And we're getting it out of that. We're developing a strong society once more, and we're keeping people at work. Over 1.8 million people are still at work. And I refuse to increase income tax on them, because if you tax work, you'll get less. The commitments we made in the programme for government were we won't increase the rates, we won't reduce the credits, we won't increase the bands, and a separate commitment, we won't increase the marginal rate of tax. We didn't do that in the last budget, we didn't do it in this budget, and it's working. Because we're not taxing work, and more people are going back to work. I haven't heard one coherent argument tonight, with one exception. with one exception. Deputy Donnelly is always constructive. But I heard no idea tonight that's worth that much to me as Minister for Finance. I had nothing that I could pick up and implement. Nothing I could pick up and implement from anybody tonight. Only the same old cant and the same old trying to build a career on the misery of the people, trying to build a career on failure. Why don't you come in and propose something constructive? It's a there was a big argument, Deputy McGrath, about the audacity of the Minister for Finance to ask the revenue to collect taxes. This is dreadful, dreadful. What do you think the revenue is for? Why do you think we have a revenue commission?
Sorry, would you, Minister, if you don't mind, would you address your remarks to the chair, please?
Through the chair, what do you think the revenue is for?
Otherwise, we're going to have this shouting match going on.
The revenue are there to collect taxes. That's their job. And they've been given the job now to collect this tax. But there's also a commitment that it will be transferred back to the local authorities. And that's what's going to happen. James Bannion, Deputy James Bannion, in a very good speech, one of the better speeches tonight. He talked about having an easy payment system, and actually in the bill there is an easy payment system. Owners can pay by deduction. They can, pay at source, depending on the way they're paid. If they're paid weekly, they can have deductions weekly, fortnightly, monthly, whatever way people are paid. They can pay by direct debit, and there's a number of ways of paying during the year. And it should be borne in mind that a total tax bill of 200, which is on the higher end of the scale, is €4 a week. Deputy Stanley talked about houses that his neighbours bought for 250,000, and he said they're worth 60,000 now. Well, if they're worth 60, they don't pay on what they paid. They paid on what their value is. The tax is paid on their value. And Deputy Healy-Rae implied the same thing. The tax is not on what you paid for the house. The tax is on the value of the house, as will be assessed in the late spring, in March or April. And if we take Deputy Stanley's example, if the house is worth 60,000, the charge will be the minimum charge of €90. And the tax will be on the 60,000 valuation, and it will be €90 a can, Corla. And I'd remind the chair that's €10 less than their liability this year, when there was a flat rate 100 charged. So there is a relationship between value and what is going to be charged on this occasion. And in general terms, people on higher incomes have higher value properties. Like, it flies in the face of reason to pretend that people on higher incomes don't have higher value properties. And the higher the value of the property, the more that people will pay. Deputy Ross had some words at second stage about the deferral system and the 4% simple interest rate. And he said that this would force people to sell their homes. Now, I mean, we all agree with hyperbole is a good way of making a point on some occasions. But this is absolutely blatant exaggeration. The rate of tax is 0.18%. Even a deferral for 20 years would result in an outstanding charge of not more than 3.6 to 4% of the house value. That's not going to drive anyone out of their homes. So, very exaggerated positions have been taken up. I've said already that we'll deal with the pirates issue in the finance bill, and we'll construct it so that they don't have to pay anything. Somebody mentioned Priory Hall tonight. I regret I don't recall which deputy. All right. Priory Hall is an unfinished estate, and in the exceptions for unfinished estates, there'll be no charge on Priory Hall. Priory Hall was exempt from the flat rate tax. It will be exempt again from this particular one. So there'll be no charge there. Owners will have the liability to pay, and the tenants of private sector landlords may bear some of the cost if landlords pass it on. On the other hand, they may not. This will be a market issue. and they'll be in the same position as tenants elsewhere. This isn't simply a family home tax. A tax on all houses owned by an individual, including holiday homes and rented property, will be subject to the charge. And somebody mentioned somebody who had 30 houses and was not paying it, Deputy Grealish, I think. Well, I mean, that's why we bring in the revenue in. He'll pay this year, he'll pay next year, because the revenue will collect it.
These guys are getting away from the revenue as well.
Well, then, you know, no, I mean, this is you know, this is the old tradition of a colony. You know, we won't obey the state because they're not our state. I mean, this country we've been running our own affairs now, Deputy McGrath, since 1922. It's about time. It's about time you backed the revenue and as a public representative said, that the revenue should collect the taxes. It's about time you said people should pay their taxes. You know, we're not dealing with a foreign power anymore. We're dealing with our own government. We're dealing with our own government since 1922. I'm talking about the fight and detach and fellas setting fire to detach and all that whole drama creating rhetoric, you know. You must be looking at black and white movies when you're selling to all that kind of stuff. No, they're all right, they're quite safe. So I don't want to be taking up good debating time. So I'll sit down now, Count Corla, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I put the question in that section 1 stand part of the bill? That agreed? Not agreed? Yeah, well, na teachtaí atá éiv na tuairiscin abadís tá, na teachtaí atá na cún abadís níl. Sílim gúil an ceisrite. Vóta.